Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, June 25th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Ball State game in 72 days, the game against Michigan in 156 days. Thanks to our friends at Jeff Ruby's Columbus for sponsoring the show today. That is the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus or scan that convenient QR code on the screen to check out the menu and make a reservation today. I'm here inside the Jerome Schottenstein Center. We just got a chance to watch a little bit of Ohio State basketball practice, and I'm joined by Marcus Hartman. You may remember Marcus Hartman from such publications as the Dayton Daily News, but now you may know that Marcus Hartman is now a part of the team at BuckeyeInsiders.com. Marcus, first of all, it's about time. We've been friends. You and Tony and I have been friends for a million years, and we keep thinking, it'd be really fun to work together. And now, huzzah, we get to work together.
I know, crazy, huh? It's weird how everything comes full circle.
So one of the things that Marcus is going to be doing for us is he's going to be focusing a lot on Ohio State men's and women's basketball and some other sports as well. Don't worry, we'll talk football with him as well, but we've had a lot of folks, every time we post a basketball video, there's lots of comments for, wow, thanks for the basketball coverage, want to see more basketball coverage. And this is really an intriguing Ohio State basketball team this year. They've got some really interesting new additions. And so we thought, okay, we can do that. If people are interested in Ohio State basketball, we can talk a bunch of Ohio State basketball. We just got a chance to watch practice. And this is a week when Ohio State has a bunch of former players in there. Thad Matta was in there as well, but Greg Oden and Scooney Penn and David Lighty and all these guys, in addition to like Will Buford and Terrence Stiles who are on staff. But a ton of familiar faces in there. This is kind of an interesting way for Jake Diebler to sort of connect the present Ohio State team, which there's a lot of roster turnover every year, and sort of almost speed run getting guys up to speed with what an Ohio State basketball tradition is. Yeah,
Ohio State basketball is such an odd situation, I think, because there's the idea that it's a sleeping giant, but it's been gone back to sleep for a while, and you want to play up the tradition, but what is the tradition? And so, I like that as a branding thing to bring in these guys from different eras that can kind of give you some more bona fides and things like that. Remind people of better days ahead, but hopefully, and the better days from the past. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of how many games they win this year. So that's what we're trying to kind of, we're sort of trying to define what the ceiling might be. And here, the last these viewing windows that we've had, have kind of, there's been a lot to like.
And one of the things I think that they like a lot about this year's team is they've got some size that they have not had in recent years. And I don't know that they have one guy who's that's a 35 minutes a night sort of center. But they just have a lot of size, a lot of different guys. 4 different guys I want to talk about on this show. One, let's start with Njegoven, and I think their Ohio State basketball fans on the whole sort of have a sense for, okay, Njegoven really didn't play 2 years ago, played a little bit of a role last year. He looks noticeably bigger this year. Again, I don't think this is a 35 minutes a game guy, but it feels like he could be at least part of the basis of a pretty good front court for them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they piece that together. And like I said when we were in there, part of it, there's a bigger discussion about what is Jake Diebler's basketball philosophy. Is it correct? Is it in line with today's philosophy, which may be changing, may be right or wrong, in terms of how many big guys you want to play, what you want to get out of them? But yes, if you're going to play one big guy, that 4-man rotation would be pretty good. And maybe if a couple of these guys can make an outside shot, that would help it all. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a certain extent, sometimes, do they just need the 5 to be an enforcer? Do they need him to be able to do anything except for block shots and dunk and get rebounds? Well, I think he can do that. Again, for how many minutes, I don't know. We'll see. But if they can, if the other guys are 4 bona fide scorers, then that really, there's a lot of different ways you could see this lineup coming together, which is good, except for sometimes it never comes together. Mm-hmm. So, we can't look at anything Ohio State basketball related and consider it all the way positive these days, just because, things have tended to not break the right way in the last few years. But it's very intriguing from that standpoint. It would be nice. It's kind of like when you're looking at the portal, they were in on several of these like dynamic, top 20 type prospects, and they didn't, get all those guys, but which would have been, a real reset, shock to the system type of a thing. But they ended up, it looks like they already had a couple of potential all Big Ten guys on the roster. And then, I think this what they ended up doing, bringing in depth kind of at every position, guys who have played, you kind of have an idea what you're getting. And I think that could work out for the best.
And one of those all Big Ten guys is Amare Bynum. And I think one of the goals for this year is you never have to have Amare Bynum be the biggest guy on the court. You'd like to have him play the 4. He was a little bit miscast at times, I think purely out of necessity last year. If you can keep him at that 4 spot and have someone else who's bigger who can play close to the rim, be your main rebounder, that frees him up to do a lot of the stuff he can do. One of the guys they brought in the transfer portal, who I think, you talked about some of the different things you can do in the different roles. 2 guys that we need to talk about. The other 2 guys I want to talk about here, Josh Ojianwuna, who they brought in the portal last year and who didn't play at all, and then Andrija Jelavic. And they brought him in this year from Kentucky. He, to me, is kind of intriguing because he's someone who I think he can go out, and I think he's comfortable going out and shooting the 3, but also he's every bit of 7 feet tall and feels like he's athletic enough that he might be able to present some mismatches for opposing teams.
Yeah, looking at his some of the highlights that we saw from last year, he does seem to be like more of a perimeter player who's tall, and sometimes that is a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing. And again, sometimes it's about fit. But I think he's got a good athleticism. He's got a higher ceiling. We haven't really seen what he could get to yet. So how he fits in there, I don't know. And he's another guy who could blossom. You never know. You put on some more weight another year in the weight room and things like that. He could be someone who is really hard for opposing teams to deal with. And you saw last year, again, you kind of talk about like what is the prevailing philosophy of college basketball now? What is Jake Diebler's philosophy? How do those go? Well, it was amazing. Pretty much every time they played a good team in the Big Ten last year, you were like, wow, they are a lot bigger than Ohio State. And it's not like they were just a bunch of Big Ten brutes from the olden days. I mean, these were like big, skilled guys. So obviously, even if you're not going to be playing that many, a bunch of 6'10" guys at 3, 4, and 5, at least if you've got more options there and you can bridge the gap there, I think that would help. Because it's also, I would rather have Bynum than a moderately developed guy who's like 6'10", because Bynum's ceiling is extremely high. So you're like, how are you creating? I think the whole thing is, how do you create opportunities for Bynum and Mobley to have the most scoring opportunities? Because those are 2 guys that, and if they're going to be good this year, those guys both need to be all Big Ten first team players, and I think they both definitely have that in them. And then how do you facilitate that? How do you make sure you're holding your own on the boards and you're holding your own defensively? I think that's what you're sort of building around those guys, and they have a lot of intriguing pieces from that standpoint. It would be nice if you just had 5 awesome players you could throw out there. Not really realistic, certainly not something we've seen at Ohio State in a long time, but you can see the vision there and how that could work.
And one other guy who's a part of this vision, which is something else you haven't seen at Ohio State in a long time, Josh Ojianwuna. We were in here last week. He was just sort of standing on the sidelines and watching, and we thought, oh boy, what's the timetable on him to be out there? And the answer was, the timetable is now. He's out there now. He was just sort of taking one day off, taking a little bit of a rest day. He had a very, very serious leg injury at Baylor a couple of years ago. Brought him in last year, didn't play at all, just a year of recuperation. He's still not 100% working his way back right now, but it sounds like the plan right now is for him to be ready right at the start of the season and ready to contribute at the start of the season. He's not going to be a 30 minutes a night guy by any means. But he also, you look at him and it was like, when has Ohio State last had a guy built like that? Because he's 6'10", but he is a really, really solidly built 6'10", where you're not going to get pushed around down near the rim if he's down there.
Yeah, we're talking in there, like a Caleb Wesson, Jared Sullinger body style type of a thing. Yeah, they haven't had a whole lot of that. I can't remember how tall Evan Ravenel, who's another guy who was here, was. But, all those good Ohio State teams were still, except for the one Evan Turner team, always still had a big guy, a traditional big guy. He may have ranged from being pretty good to really, really good. So you're not looking at having a really, really good team, but a really, really good guy like that. But it will be interesting to see, it's another piece, like I said, that they didn't have. They've got more length and athleticism, and they've got more physicality, it looks like. Now, how will that blend with trying to play this kind of, positionless, high skill style of basketball, which they want to play. It's again, sometimes that stuff you never quite settle on a winning formula, and it doesn't work. Sometimes that could be something that works out extremely well. And in college basketball, I think there's a lot more variance now across the landscape than there used to be. But then there's no substitute for talent and skill, especially if you're not relying on too much youth, especially now, because again, we haven't even talked about Anthony Thompson being a guy who 10 years ago, you would be banking on him coming in and being an all Big Ten level player. Now, even if he is an all Big Ten level talent as a freshman, the landscape is a lot more difficult because you're playing a lot more size, a lot more maturity. Even if he has more raw talent than a lot of these guys, it's going to be more like the olden days where you come in, and even when you're, back in the 80s and 90s, you come in and even the most talented freshmen, well, you had to deal with these like legitimate guys who are 22 and however much raw ability they have. They've got 4 years in the weight room. They've got 4 years of learning the tricks of the trade and everything, and you've got to deal with that. So it's a little different than these guys walking in as freshmen and, the other guys you're competing against, they're pretty much your age or maybe a year older. So it's a different type of a playing field.
And the last guy that I wanted to mention in terms of the big guys that they've brought in this year, Vuk Lazarovic, he is a true freshman. My expectation is this is going to be a little bit of a learning and growing year for him. Probably someone who needs to spend a year with the strength and conditioning staff to get ready to bang down low. But another 7-footer where this is someone that anything you get out of him as a true freshman is a bonus. You have true freshmen, Anthony Thompson, I think LJ Smith, they want to get something out of them. For Vuk Lazarovic, this feels like if you get 4 good minutes out of him a night at some point this season, that's probably a big thumbs up, and we'll see you next year.
Well, I would think if everybody's healthy, I don't know if he'll play at all in Big Ten games that are competitive, but you're right, that's a good thing. And it's good to have, we've gotten to this where it's been so wild, there's no continuity from year to year, but you can still look at, I've been saying for a long time, because the formula of recruit as many NBA quality players as you can and hope for the best has not been working for Ohio State for about 12 years. So maybe they should try to be Wisconsin before they try to be old-fashioned Ohio State or whoever else. And you look at their roster, and they've got 4 or 5 developmental big guys. They've got a couple of legit 4-star prospects, and then they'll have a couple of good transfers. And I think now it's good to see that they've got some guys who are big and have some ceiling that you don't have to rely on. Now, obviously, you got to keep them from year to year, but I think in the long term, Ohio State is not a program that's just going to continually reload with talent. I think you need to have 5 or 6 program guys every year, and maybe if the raw talent is their size is something you can't teach. I think they've really limited in having like skilled talent, which you can be skilled without being talented, I guess. Skilled players, skilled size is what I meant to say. There needs to be some guys that you're working on and working up, and you're not just filling every hole every year with freshmen and transfers, which is what some programs are going to try to do. I don't think that's a winning formula for Ohio State unless there's any people out there who want to donate much more heavily to the NIL fund, which if there are, feel free, go ahead. But I wouldn't bank on that, and I think that's the best that's the long-term play there, and I think it's a good idea. Whether you get anything out of him or not, that's for the best.
Well, it feels like in year 3 of the Jake Diebler era, they're sort of figuring out how to work within the confines and the constraints that they have, where you're not ever going to be a top of the Big Ten in terms of payroll and the ability to pay players. So you have to sort of figure out, okay, where do you put your resources and where do you try and go, okay, we're going to try and find some value here. And maybe it's a little bit of a process and it's not an immediate plug and play. It might be, okay, it's going to take a year. Okay, it's a guy who's coming in and he might not be healthy for his first year, but then if you can get him his second year, that's a real opportunity. It feels like just as a program, there's sort of the general trend line with Ohio State basketball through the last couple of years has been upwards. And it feels like they're doing a decent job of figuring out, okay, what are the constraints we're working within, and how do you make the best team out of that?
Well, I think just like in football and baseball, basketball is a little different with the slotting of all the salaries and stuff. But just like in football and baseball, you have to overpay for free agents. So you can look at it 2 ways. I mean, you don't necessarily have to get a discount from the guys you bring in, the guys you develop. But if you can get your own guys and keep them at market value, you know what you're getting. I mean, there's you never know basically any transfer. The transfers that look great on paper all over the place don't work out. Ohio State transfers have worked out less probably than a lot of other programs. So I think, again, that's what you've got to do. And I also think you can be like some of these smaller market teams. You can push the budget a little bit when you know it's going to be worth it because you know you're going to be good. And then winning begets winning. And that's going to bring in more NIL money. It's going to bring in more guys who are like, well, maybe, I'd rather be part of this than absolutely max out what I can get someplace else too. So it all kind of builds on itself. So again, I think the developmental thing is something that's been lacking for a long time. Partly, it's not necessarily Ohio State's fault. It's just college basketball has gotten funky. Even back in the Mata era, guys were starting to leave. It just wasn't as supercharged as it is now in terms of keeping guys around. And so I'm optimistic that I think they're trending toward the type of program that they need to be in terms of being a developmental program that can supplement with the elite talents when you get them. Maybe Michigan State is even more of a. It's not that they just go out there and sign multiple McDonald's All-Americans every year. They've got guys that are developing. They've got talented guys, and they don't really flip the roster every year either. Because flipping the roster, even if May had stayed at Michigan, I don't think it was any sure thing he wasn't going to have some. You take it with the championship.
Yeah,
it's no sure thing that you weren't going to have a year where it just all fell apart and didn't work out. And I think the same thing with football. Ohio State's trying to avoid having to bring in too many transfers at least every year. You're going to have some years where you need more than others, but because you just never know where that mix is just too volatile and it falls apart, like if Florida State or something like that.
Yeah, the more people you're bringing in, the more stuff you're changing, the higher variance of a season you've got, and that can be good and that can be bad. So this year, Ohio State, definitely a new look for the Ohio State Buckeyes men's basketball team, but an intriguing mix, big front court, some couple five-star freshmen, some really intriguing pieces there. So we will see how that all comes together, and we'll be doing that with you at BuckeyeInsiders.com. Where again, Marcus could be covering some basketball for us, women's basketball, some other sports. Of course, we'll be covering plenty of football as well. We'll be talking to Ross Bjork on Thursday morning about a whole bunch of different topics. Guessing there are a few things in the college sports realm that we'll have to talk about. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. And of course, thanks again to our friends at Jeff Ruby's Columbus, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.